The Ecliptica wasn't just any starship. It was the largest hub of the Alliance, a sprawling labyrinth of gleaming corridors, bustling chambers, and the hum of advanced technology. Within its steel bones it housed delegates, officers, and dignitaries from every corner of the galaxy. It was a beacon of hope, or so the promotional hall of its claimed. To Alex Carter, it was just another assignment in an increasingly thankless career. As he slung his duffel bag over his shoulder, Alex squinted at the terminal display in front of him. His quarters assignment blinked mockingly. Section 7, Deck 12, Unit 43A. Shared quarters? Are you kidding me? He muttered to himself, running a hand through his unruly black hair. Problem, Carter? Drawled a passing officer, the kind of smug bureaucrat Alex had grown to loathe. Nothing I can't handle, Lex replied with a forced grin, though his tone carried enough venom to peel paint off a bulkhead. The first encounter. When Alex reached his new quarters, the door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a room that was smaller than most storage closets he'd seen. One side was meticulously arranged, a narrow bed tucked so tightly it might have been laser-sealed, a crystalline artifact glowing faintly on the desk, and a stack of data slates arranged by size. The other side? Bare, save for a neatly folded blanket atop an untouched mattress. But it wasn't the room that caught his attention. "Ah, you're here." The voice was crisp, almost melodic, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut through Alex's usual bravado. Standing by the window was an alien figure with an almost ethereal quality. Her skin, translucent and faceted like polished quartz, shimmered faintly under the light. Her eyes, a piercing shade of sapphire, fixed on him with unblinking intensity. "Let me guess," Alex said, tossing his bag onto the empty bed with a theatrical flourish. "You're my roommate." "I am Zariana Valerian," she replied, her tone as formal as a ceremonial decree. "Diplomatic envoy, second rank." "And you are?" "Alex Carter, pilot, second to none," he said with a cocky grin, leaning against the wall. Zariana's gaze swept over him like a scanner, her crystalline face unreadable. "Your reputation precedes you. The report suggested you would be unorthodox." "Unorthodox? That's one way to put it. I like to think of myself as charmingly unpredictable." The sound was less an acknowledgement and more an indictment. She turned back to the window, clearly uninterested in continuing the conversation. The sparks fly. By the time Alex had unpacked, if throwing his belongings haphazardly around the room could be called unpacking, the tension in the quarters was palpable. Zariana's composure hadn't faltered, but her crystalline skin seemed to reflect a harsher light, as though her very essence disapproved of his existence. "Do you always operate in such chaos?" she asked, gesturing toward the heap of clothes spilling from Alex's bag. "Chaos? I call it organized improvisation," he quipped, unperturbed. She arched what might have been an eyebrow, though the crystalline structure of her face made it hard to tell. "Improvisation is a poor substitute for discipline. And discipline is just a fancy word for boring." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Alex thought he saw a flicker of irritation cross her otherwise impassive features. "Do you intend to leave this mess?" she asked, her tone icy. "Relax, princess," Alex replied, reclining on his bed. "You can meditate or crystallize or whatever it is you do, and I'll stay out of your way." Zariana's crystalline form shimmered faintly as she turned to face him. "If you intend to survive aboard this station, I suggest you adopt a more respectful tone. Diplomacy is not a game, Carter." "And yet, you're playing it like it's your whole life," Alex shot back. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken challenges, the room feeling far smaller than it had moments before. A fragile truce? The impasse was broken by the station's automated chime, announcing a mandatory meeting for all personnel. Alex grabbed his jacket, flashing Zariana a grin as he headed for the door. "Don't wait up, Crystal Lady." As the door slid shut behind him, Zariana exhaled a soft melodic hum that resonated faintly in the stillness. She glanced at his side of the room, now a chaotic contrast to her meticulously maintained space. Her fingers brushed against the glowing crystal on her desk, its steady light calming her frayed nerves. "This will be intolerable," she murmured to herself. Parallel lives, colliding worlds? Elsewhere on the Ecliptica, Alex found himself seated in a crowded briefing room, tuning out the droning voice of a station administrator. His mind wandered back to his new roommate. Zariana's presence gnawed at him in a way he couldn't quite explain. She was cold, rigid, and yet there was something about her, something unshakable and oddly magnetic. Meanwhile, back in their quarters, Zariana stared out at the stars. The human's recklessness grated on her nerves. a stark reminder of the chaos she had been sent to contain. Yet, as much as she despised his undisciplined ways, there was a spark in him, a dangerous, unpredictable spark that both irritated and intrigued her. Neither of them realized it yet, but the collision of their worlds had only just begun. The days aboard the Ecliptica fell into a frustrating rhythm for Alex Carter and Zariana. Their shared quarters, no larger than a cargo container, became a battleground of personalities. Every corner of the room seemed to buzz with tension, the atmosphere thick with the clash of human impulsiveness and Valerian discipline. It was during one of the ship's artificial nights, under the dimmed lights of the quarters, that the first crack in their animosity appeared. The first sleepless night. Alex lay sprawled on his bunk, staring at the curved ceiling, his arms tucked behind his head. Sleep eluded him. It wasn't the first time the perpetual hum of the station and the weight of his own thoughts had robbed him of rest for years. He turned his head to the side, his eyes catching the faint glow of Zariana's crystalline form. She sat cross-legged on her bed, utterly still, the light of her artifact casting soft reflections onto her sharp features. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice cutting through the silence. "Meditating," she replied without opening her eyes. Her tone was as smooth and cold as ever, but there was something different about it, softer, perhaps. "Doesn't look very restful." "It is not about rest, it is about focus. Discipline of the mind brings clarity to one's actions." Alex snorted. "That sounds exhausting." Zariana opened one eye, fixing him with a piercing sapphire gaze. "Perhaps if you cultivated even a fraction of discipline, you would find yourself less disordered. And perhaps if you stopped overthinking everything, you'd have some fun for once." He grinned, but it faltered when she didn't respond. "Do Valerians even do fun?" She closed her eye again, but not before Alex caught a faint flicker of something annoyance. Amusement? It was impossible to tell. "Fun is a luxury," she said after a long pause, one that those of us with responsibilities cannot afford. Alex was quiet for a moment, his grin fading. He stared up at the ceiling again. "Yeah, I guess I wouldn't know about responsibilities." His voice was low, almost bitter, the bravado drained from it. The unexpected shift in his tone made Zariana open both eyes. She studied him for a moment, her crystalline features unreadable. "Is that what you believe?" "Isn't it what you believe?" he shot back, though the edge in his voice was half-hearted. Zariana didn't answer. Instead, she shifted slightly, her crystalline skin catching the light. "It is late. You should rest." Alex smirked, the moment of vulnerability passing as quickly as it had come. "Yes, Mom," he muttered, earning an audible sigh from her as he turned over and shut his eyes. A tenuous understanding. The uneasy truce continued the next day. Alex made a conscious effort to keep his side of the room somewhat tidy, not out of respect, but to avoid another lecture. Zariana, for her part, refrained from commenting on his habits, though her silence felt louder than any reprimand. It wasn't until Alex stumbled upon the crystal. Alex had been rummaging through his things, searching for a spare comm device he'd misplaced, when his hand brushed against the glowing artifact on Zariana's desk. It was warm to the touch, faint pulses of light running through its faceted surface like veins of molten gold. "What the hell is this thing?" he muttered, lifting it slightly for a better look. The moment his fingers closed around it, a sharp hiss filled the room. "Put that down." Zariana's voice was like a blade of ice slicing through the air. Alex turned to find her standing in the doorway, her crystalline skin shimmering with faint, fiery hues, a reaction he hadn't seen before. Her eyes blazed with anger. Relax," Alex said, quickly setting the crystal back on the desk. "I was just curious." "Curiosity does not excuse disrespect," she said, striding toward him. She snatched the artifact and cradled it in her hands as though it were a living thing. "It's a rock," Alex said defensively. "It is a Kinthus shard," she snapped. "A sacred artifact of my people, symbolizing balance and unity. It is not some rock for you to paw at." Alex held up his hands in mock surrender. All right, my bad." Zariana's glare softened slightly, though her posture remained rigid. She placed the shard back on the desk with reverent care, her fingers lingering on its surface. "Why is it so important to you?" Alex asked, his tone uncharacteristically serious. Zariana hesitated. "It belonged to my mentor," she said quietly. "It was entrusted to me when I took my place as an envoy. It is a reminder of the harmony I must uphold, even when chaos surrounds me." Alex blinked, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. "Guess I shouldn't have touched it, then," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "No," she agreed. though her tone was less harsh now. "You should not have." Later that night, Alex returned to the quarters carrying a small device in his hand. Zariana was seated at her desk, working on a diplomatic report. She didn't look up when he entered. "Hey," he said, his voice unusually subdued. She turned, her gaze cool but expectant. I wanted to fix things," he said, holding out the device. It was a small repair tool, designed for delicate crystal work. "I know I messed up with your shard. Thought this might help, if it ever gets damaged or whatever." Zariana stared at the device, then at Alex. For the first time since they'd met, her expression softened. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking the tool from him. Alex shrugged, trying to mask his relief with nonchalance. "Don't mention it. Seriously, don't. It'd ruin my reputation." Zariana tilted her head, and for the briefest moment, Alex thought he saw the faintest hint of a smile. That night, as the artificial lights dimmed and the hum of the station filled the silence, Alex and Zariana found themselves exchanging tentative words. They spoke of their homeworlds, their duties, their frustrations with the Alliance. Zariana shared the story of her mentor, a Valerian elder who had taught her the art of diplomacy and the weight of her people's expectations. Alex, in turn, revealed pieces of himself. He rarely shared the loneliness of a drifter, the doubts that gnawed at him despite his confident exterior. The animosity between them didn't vanish overnight, but for the first time it cracked. Beneath the shards of their differences, something unspoken began to take root, a fragile understanding, born of shared vulnerability and the faintest spark of trust. The ecliptica thrummed with tension. Whispers of unrest rippled through the corridors as the station prepared to host a pivotal summit, one that could determine the future of the fragile alliance. Delegates from every corner of the galaxy filled the halls, their faces drawn with suspicion and fatigue. It was a time for precision, unity, and trust, none of which seemed abundant. For Alex, Carter, and Zariana, the undercurrents of unease felt all too familiar. Their tentative peace in their shared quarters was far from perfect, but something had shifted. Their once antagonistic exchanges were now tempered with curiosity, understanding, and unexpectedly an increasing awareness of one another. The storm before the crisis. Alex stood by the observation window in their quarters, his silhouette framed by the endless expanse of stars. He swirled a cup of synthesized coffee in his hand, its bitter scent mingling with the sterile air. "Do you ever wonder," he said, breaking the silence, "why we're even trying to make this alliance work? Half these species can't stand the sight of each other." Behind him, Zariana sat at her desk, her fingers lightly tracing the glowing Kenthis shard. Its soft light reflected in her crystalline skin, giving her an ethereal glow. "Survival often requires cooperation," she replied, "even among those who find it distasteful." Alex snorted. "Yeah, but you ever think maybe some of us aren't meant to get along? Maybe we're just too different?" Zariana turned her head slightly, her sapphire gaze piercing. "Is that what you believe, or are you merely afraid to adapt?" Alex opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. The truth was, he didn't know what he believed anymore. Their exchange was interrupted by the sharp chime of the intercom. A voice crackled through. "All personnel report to your designated stations. Emergency briefing in 10 minutes. The seeds of chaos." In the briefing chamber, the tension was palpable. Holographic displays projected grim images of a colony world, its surface scarred by destruction. The colony had been attacked by an unknown force, and preliminary evidence pointed to Valerian involvement. The room erupted into murmurs and accusations, fingers pointing in every direction. Alex cast a glance at Zariana. Her posture was rigid, her crystalline features betraying no emotion, but he knew her well enough now to see the cracks forming beneath her stoic exterior. "This is a fabrication," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. Alex leaned closer, his voice low. "You sure about that?" "Absolutely," she replied, her tone colder than usual. "Valerian does not engage in unprovoked attacks. This is a deliberate attempt to destabilize the alliance." Alex frowned. "Then we'd better find out who's behind it." The forced partnership. As a diplomat, Zariana was granted access to the investigation, and Alex, to his surprise, was assigned as her escort. Their differing styles clashed immediately. Alex barreled into situations headfirst, questioning suspects and poking into corners without hesitation, while Zariana meticulously pieced together evidence, her every move deliberate. "Your recklessness will jeopardize this investigation," Zariana said as they exited a briefing room. "And your overthinking's going to slow us down," Alex shot back. "Sometimes you've got to trust your gut." "Instinct without clarity is as dangerous as blindness," she retorted. Despite their bickering, they began to uncover pieces of the truth. A hidden data stream led them to a rogue faction operating within the station, a group intent on sowing distrust and igniting war between the alliance species. The assassination attempt. Their breakthrough was nearly their undoing. As they navigated the dimly lit maintenance corridors following a trail of encrypted communications, a shadow moved in the corner of Alex's vision. "Get down," he shouted, grabbing Zariana and pulling her to the floor just as a bolt of searing energy scorched the air above them. An assassin emerged from the shadows, clad in sleek black armor that reflected no light. They moved with precision, their weapon trained on Alex and Zariana. Zariana reacted first. Her crystalline form shimmered as she lunged forward, deflecting a second energy bolt with a shimmering forearm. The sound was like glass shattering, but she remained unyielding. Alex, seizing the moment, pulled his sidearm and fired a quick succession of shots, forcing the assassin to retreat. The fight was brutal and chaotic, the confined space amplifying every sound. At one point, the assassin lunged at Zariana, their blade grazing her crystalline skin. She let out a sharp gasp of pain but didn't falter, using her strength to shove them away. Alex managed to disable the attacker with a well-placed shot, but not before the assassin activated a self-destruct mechanism, dissolving into a cloud of acidic mist. "Are you all right?" Alex asked, panting as he helped Zariana to her feet. She winced, holding her arm where the blade had struck. "I will recover. Valerian physiology is resilient." "Yeah, well, you're not invincible," Alex said, his voice softer than usual. "Let's get you patched up." The touch of curiosity. Back in their quarters, Alex carefully applied a medical sealant to the small fracture on Zariana's arm. The crystalline structure of her body fascinated him. It was both delicate and unyielding, cool to the touch yet radiating a faint warmth from within. "You're a lot tougher than you look," he said, his tone light but genuine. Zariana studied him, her sapphire eyes thoughtful. "Humans are softer," she said. "Your physiology is remarkably fragile." "Gee, thanks," Alex said with a smirk. "No, I do not mean it as an insult." She hesitated, as if weighing her next words carefully. "It is simply curious." "What is?" Zariana looked at him, her expression uncharacteristically open. "How your species reproduces. It is so unlike my own." Alex blinked, taken aback. "Well, it's not that complicated." Zariana tilted her head. "We do not experience physical touch in the same way. For Valerians, reproduction is a union of energy and resonance. It is a merging of crystalline harmonics, not physicality." Alex swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Yeah, humans are a bit more hands-on." Zariana leaned closer, her curiosity evident. "What does it feel like, to touch another in such a way?" Alex froze, her question hanging in the air. The tension between them crackled like static, and for a moment he wasn't sure if the heat rising in his chest was from embarrassment or something deeper. Zariana's fingers lingered for a moment longer than necessary, brushing against the rough calluses on Alex's hand. Her touch was cool, smooth, and impossibly delicate, yet it carried an unexpected intensity, a quiet power that caught Alex off guard. He remained still, unsure whether to pull away or lean into the strange electric sensation crackling between them. "It's strange," Zariana murmured, her crystalline voice barely above a whisper. Her sapphire eyes searched his face, her curiosity unhidden. "Your skin is warm, almost fragile, and yet it does not feel weak." Alex blinked, his heartbeat inexplicably loud in his ears. "Yeah, well, we humans are pretty durable, even when we don't look it." His attempt at humor came out softer than he intended, almost vulnerable. Zariana tilted her head slightly, her crystalline structure catching the dim light, reflecting a soft, radiant glow. "To us, touch is functional, practical. We connect through harmonics and resonance, the blending of energy patterns to produce new life. There's no sensation as you describe it." Alex cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, for us it's a bit more personal." Her fingers brushed against his palm, exploring the lines and textures with a meticulous, almost clinical fascination. But there was something else in her touch, a subtle shift from mere curiosity to something deeper. "What does it mean to you?" she asked, her voice low, as if the question carried more weight than she was used to admitting. "What does what mean?" Alex asked, swallowing hard. "Touch," she said simply. "If it is so personal, what does it mean when you share it?" Alex hesitated, searching her gaze for clues to her intent. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence felt closer, heavier, like the atmosphere had grown charged between them. He let out a slow breath. "It depends," he said honestly. "Sometimes it's just comfort. Sometimes it's about trust. And sometimes," he paused, his voice catching slightly, "sometimes it's more." Zariana's gaze didn't waver, her crystalline features illuminated by the faint glow of the artifact on her desk. "More," she echoed, her tone almost contemplative. "How so?" Alex felt the distance between them shrink, though neither of them moved. Her curiosity wasn't just intellectual, it carried an intensity that unsettled and intrigued him in equal measure. More as in connection, he said, his voice quieter now, like you're letting someone see a part of you that you don't show anyone else. He trailed off, searching for the words. It's vulnerable. Intimate. Zariana's fingers traced the edge of his hand, her touch as light as a whisper. Intimacy, she repeated, testing the word as though it were foreign. And this is why humans value touch so highly. Alex nodded, his throat tight. Yeah, it's a way of saying what words can't. Zariana studied him for a long moment, her hand still resting lightly on his. Then, as if making a decision, she shifted closer. May I? She asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. May you what? Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Understand, she said simply. Her crystalline fingers moved up his arm, her touch feather-light, yet it sent shivers racing across his skin. This connection you speak of. Alex's breath hitched. He wasn't sure if it was her curiosity or the intensity of her presence, but the room felt impossibly warm, the air thick with unspoken tension. He didn't pull away. Yeah, he said, his voice raw. Go ahead. Her fingers moved with careful deliberation, tracing the contours of his arm, his shoulder. Every touch was exploratory, almost reverent, as if she were trying to absorb the meaning of the contact through her fingertips. You respond, she said, her tone faintly surprised. Your body reacts. Is that typical? Alex couldn't help but laugh softly, a nervous sound that broke the charged silence. Yeah, that's typical. Zariana's gaze met his, her sapphire eyes filled with questions he wasn't sure how to answer. Do you find this uncomfortable? No, he said quickly, the word leaving his lips before he could second-guess it. It's not uncomfortable. She tilted her head, studying him as if trying to discern whether he spoke the truth. Slowly, her hand moved to rest against his chest, just above his heart. The crystalline tips of her fingers were cool against the heat of his skin, and Alex felt his pulse quicken under her touch. This is different, she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. I can feel the rhythm. Is it your life force? My heartbeat, Alex said, his voice barely steady. It's kind of like that. Zariana's fingers lingered, her expression softening as if the sound and sensation held a meaning she couldn't yet grasp. It is constant, she said, steady. It is reassuring. Alex swallowed hard, the weight of her words and the intimacy of the moment rendering him speechless. He raised a hand, hesitating for a split second before resting it lightly on hers, the warmth of his skin enveloping her cool crystalline texture. It goes both ways, he said quietly, his voice tinged with something he couldn't name. Touch, it's not just about one person. For the first time since they had met, Zariana smiled. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there a fleeting curve of her lips that lit her crystalline face like a distant star. I see, she whispered. Neither of them moved, the silence between them stretching into something profound. In that moment, the barriers of species, culture, and prejudice dissolved, leaving only the raw, unspoken connection between two beings who had come to understand each other in ways neither had expected. The days following their moment of connection were marked by a subtle yet undeniable shift. The tension in their quarters was no longer combative, but something else entirely, something unspoken, magnetic, and deeply unsettling to them both. Neither Alex nor Zariana addressed it outright, but it lingered in the air like static electricity, buzzing beneath the surface of every glance, every word, every shared breath in their confined space. Alex woke earlier than usual, the synthetic sunlight of the ecliptica filtering through the opaque was bed. His body felt unusually heavy, weighed down not by fatigue but by the memory of Zariana's touch from the previous night. He turned his head slightly, his gaze settling on her. She was at her desk, as she often was, her posture as straight and disciplined as ever. But there was something softer in her demeanor this morning, a quietness that hadn't been there before. You're up early, Alex said, his voice rough with sleep. Zariana turned to face him, her sapphire eyes catching the light like fractured gems. Sleep eluded me, she admitted, her tone softer than usual. Alex sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Something on your mind? She hesitated, her crystalline fingers resting on the glowing shard at her desk. I was considering, she said slowly, what you said about connection. Alex blinked, his heart skipping a beat. Yeah? Zariana turned fully to face him, her expression unreadable but her eyes piercing. Humans place great importance on such things. It is unfamiliar to me, but it is also compelling. He wasn't sure how to respond, the memory of her cool touch against his skin still vivid. Compelling, huh? He said, his attempt at levity falling flat in the charged silence. Zariana rose from her seat, her movements as graceful as flowing water. She crossed the small room, stopping just a step away from him. Her crystalline form caught the light, casting faint rainbows on the walls. "You said touch is a way of saying what words cannot," she said. "That it is personal. Intimate." Alex nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, that's right." Her sapphire gaze held his. "And yet there is more you did not say. What is it, Alex Carter, that touch conveys when words are insufficient?" The question was simple, but the weight behind it made Alex's pulse quicken. He hesitated, searching her gaze for some clue as to what she truly wanted. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "it's about trust. About letting someone in." And sometimes he trailed off, his voice catching. "Sometimes," Zariana prompted, her voice quiet but insistent. "Sometimes," Alex continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's about wanting to be close to someone, closer than anything else." Her crystalline features softened, the faint glow within her body pulsing gently like the ebb and flow of a tide. She reached out, her hand hovering just above his. "May I?" she asked again, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the quiet hum of the room. Alex nodded, unable to find his voice. When her hand touched his, the contact was deliberate, gentle. Her fingers, cool and smooth, slid over his palm, exploring its texture with an almost reverent curiosity. But this time there was something different, less clinical, more searching. The exploration. Zariana moved closer, her crystalline skin radiating a faint warmth that Alex hadn't noticed before. Her other hand joined the first, both cradling his hand as if it were something precious. "It is remarkable," she murmured, her sapphire eyes fixed on the connection between them. "This sensation, it is unlike anything I have known." Alex swallowed hard, his voice coming out hoarse. "It's different for everyone. But yeah, it's something." She looked up at him then, her gaze piercing and unguarded. "Show me," she said simply. Alex's breath caught. "Show you what?" "What it means," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something vulnerable. "To be close. To share this connection in the way humans do." Alex froze, the gravity of her request crashing down on him. He searched her face, looking for hesitation, but found none. Her expression was open, her curiosity boundless, and her trust in him, however fragile, was clear. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Zariana nodded. "I wish to understand." For a long moment Alex hesitated. Then, slowly he raised his other hand, letting it rest lightly on hers. His fingers brushed over her crystalline skin, tracing its delicate facets. Her body responded, faint pulses of light rippling beneath the surface, like a living star chart. "It's not just about touch," he said quietly. "It's about feeling, about wanting to be here, with someone." Zariana tilted her head, her gaze never leaving his. "And you feel this with me?" Alex hesitated, the vulnerability in her voice striking something deep within him. He nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "I do." Zariana's sapphire eyes softened, her crystalline features illuminated by the faint glow of her internal light. She moved closer, their faces mere inches apart now. "Then show me," she whispered. Alex's heart thundered in his chest as he leaned in, the world narrowing to just the two of them. His lips brushed against hers, cool, smooth, and unexpectedly soft. The contact sent a jolt through him, electric and exhilarating, and he felt her body respond in kind, the faint light within her pulsing brighter. Zariana's hands tightened around his, her crystalline fingers trembling slightly. When they broke apart, her sapphire eyes were wide, her expression a mix of awe and confusion. "That," she said, her voice barely audible, "is extraordinary." Alex chuckled softly, his forehead resting against hers. "Yeah, it is." For a moment, neither of them moved, the silence between them filled with unspoken understanding. Then Zariana pulled back slightly, her gaze searching his. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but warm. "For what?" Alex asked, his voice tinged with wonder. "For trusting me," she said simply. And with that, the unspoken tension between them melted into something deeper, something fragile yet unbreakable, like the crystalline structure of her form. In that quiet, intimate moment, they found a connection that transcended words, species, and the boundaries of their worlds. The station was a hive of tension. Every corridor thrummed with the murmurs of uneasy delegates, every chamber a stage for thinly veiled accusations and uneasy alliances. The conspiracy Alex and Zariana had uncovered had rippled outward, its tendrils threatening to collapse the fragile unity of the alliance. In their quarters, the atmosphere was no less charged, though the tension there carried a different weight. Alex sat at the edge of his bed, fidgeting with the clasp of his utility jacket, while Zariana stood by the window, her crystalline form reflecting the soft starlight outside. A shared resolve. "They're not going to listen," Alex said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, his frustration barely contained. "The council's too busy pointing fingers to see what's really going on." Zariana turned, her sapphire eyes calm but sharp with determination. "Then we will make them listen," she said. Her tone carried the weight of conviction, the kind of unyielding certainty Alex had come to admire and occasionally resent. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We've got half the station thinking Valerian's behind this mess, and the other half waiting for an excuse to start shooting. You really think we can turn this around?" "I do," Zariana said simply. She stepped closer, her presence grounding him in a way he couldn't quite explain. "Because we must. The Alliance cannot afford to fracture. And because I trust you, Alex Carter." Her words hit him like a blow, not because of their weight, but because of the quiet certainty behind them. He met her gaze, his chest tightening. "Yeah," he said softly. "I trust you too." The confrontation? The Alliance Summit was held in the Ecliptica's Grand Assembly Chamber, a sprawling amphitheater lined with holographic displays of distant worlds. Delegates filled the room, their voices a cacophony of discord. At the center stood the council, a diverse group of leaders struggling to maintain order. Alex and Zariana entered together, their presence drawing immediate attention. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some curious, others hostile. "Envoy Zariana," one of the council members said, her voice sharp. "You stand accused of harboring information that implicates Valerian in the destruction of Colony Beta 5. What say you in your defense?" Zariana stepped forward, her crystalline form catching the light like a living prism. "I say that this accusation is a deliberate falsehood intended to fracture the Alliance and ignite conflict," she said, her voice calm but resonant. A murmur spread through the crowd. Alex watched as her words began to cut through the noise, her presence commanding in a way that silenced even the most vocal skeptics. "And what proof do you offer?" another delegate demanded. At that, Alex stepped forward, holding up a small data chip. "This," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Encrypted communications from a rogue faction operating within the station. They've been planting false evidence, manipulating intel, and feeding your paranoia. The Valerian had nothing to do with the attack." The holographic displays lit up as Alex inserted the chip into the central terminal. A series of intercepted transmissions played, each one revealing the rogue faction's machinations. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on every delegate. The silence didn't last long. Just as the final transmission ended, the chamber's lights flickered. A sharp crack echoed through the air, a gunshot. Chaos erupted. Delegates screamed and scattered as a figure in dark armor appeared on one of the upper balconies, a rifle aimed directly at the council. Alex didn't think, he moved. Grabbing Zariana's arm, he pulled her behind a nearby console as another shot rang out, narrowly missing them. "Sniper," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the din. Zariana didn't flinch. Her crystalline form shimmered as she rose to her feet, her sapphire gaze fixed on the assassin. "We cannot let them succeed," she said firmly. "I'm open to suggestions," Alex yelled, peeking out from behind the console to fire a few wild shots at the sniper. Zariana didn't reply. Instead, she focused on the sniper, her crystalline body glowing brighter with each passing second. The light intensified until it became a blinding burst, reflecting off the chamber walls and disorienting the assassin. "Now, Alex," she called. Taking advantage of the distraction, Alex bolted toward the balcony, his movements swift and unrelenting. He reached the assassin in seconds, tackling them to the ground. The two grappled, the sound of fists and boots echoing through the chamber. The assassin was strong, but Alex's adrenaline and sheer determination gave him the edge. With a final, desperate blow, he knocked the rifle from their hands and pinned them to the ground. "It's over," Alex growled, his breath ragged. The turning point. Back in the chamber, the council stood in stunned silence as security forces dragged the assassin away. Alex and Zariana returned to the center, their presence commanding the room once more. "This is what division brings," Zariana said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. "It is what these conspirators sought to achieve. But if we stand together, if we choose unity over fear, we can overcome this." Alex nodded, stepping beside her. "She's right. They wanted us to tear ourselves apart. Don't give them the satisfaction." The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, the delegates began to nod. One by one, they voiced their agreement, their words building into a chorus of renewed determination. A quiet moment. Later, back in their quarters, Alex and Zariana sat in silence. The weight of the day hung heavy between them, but there was a quiet sense of accomplishment as well. "We did it," Alex said finally, breaking the silence. Zariana nodded, her crystalline form dimmed but still radiant. "For now. The road ahead remains difficult." Alex smirked, leaning back against his bed. "Yeah, but at least we're on it together." Zariana tilted her head, her sapphire eyes meeting his. "Together," she echoed softly. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Zariana reached out, her fingers brushing against his. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through. Alex smiled, his fingers closing around hers. "We make a good team," he said. "Yes," Zariana agreed, her voice steady but warm. "We do." As the stars outside their window shimmered, the two of them sat together, their bond a testament to the power of unity, even the most uncertain of times.